Right.
Cool, right. Welcome to the Working Wellbeings podcast. We finally made it. How many times have we tried?
Quite a few, but we're here and we're going. So let's do it.
We're here live at the watercolour. It's near the end of day one, so we could do maybe a bit of reflection on how this has gone as part of this conversation. But wait, I should get you to introduce yourself first for our listeners.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I'm really bad at introducing myself, so I do apologise. So I'm Dr. Zofia Bajorek. I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Employment Studies. I suppose I've worked in the health and wellbeing field for about 15 odd years now. I suppose it started looking at it a little bit when I was doing my PhD, and then I worked at the Work Foundation with the guru that was Stephen Bevan, who mentored me and managed me for 11 years. God bless his soul. He brought me to where I am today, and I'm forever grateful for that. So now I'm trying to build my own reputation in this field. It's a hugely growing field, not always for the right reasons, and within that, I suppose I really like talking about line managers, which is probably what you're going to ask me.
No.
Probably what I'm best known for, but is that a good enough introduction?
Yeah, I was going to ask you why you thought you weren't good at introductions.
Because I suffer massively, and I suppose like many of us do, with imposter syndrome. There's so many good speakers out there and good influencers and good thinkers, and sometimes you think, I'm just little me in this big world. And when you follow people, because I know you've just spoken to Dame Carol Black, and so when I'm following somebody like her, massive shoes, really small feet.
That is not true. You got huge feet. No. She doesn't have huge feet.
Loud feet.
Yeah, no. And then also you said in your intro that this is an area that is hugely growing, but maybe not for the right reasons. What did you mean by that?
Well, I like coming to these events because you do get the Peter Cheeses, you do get the Dame Carols who talk about the evidence around wellbeing, which is really what I'm here for and what IES is here for. But then you walk around the stands and you have your scented candles or your flash motivational quotes, and these are the wellbeing spangly perks that all organisations need. And that's where I think it gets a little bit dangerous. We need the evidence. Organisations want to know what will actually make change. And when people come to these conferences and they hear the evidence, and then there's a dichotomy with the stands around, and I'm not saying that's all stands, but I think we have to be very careful when we come to conferences to make sure that the two messages are actually matching each other, because people might go home to say, well, I got my massage done, and so I'm going to come and have a massage. People come to massage my staff every Friday, and well-being is going to be miraculously improved in our organisation. Now, it might make somebody happy for 30 minutes or an hour. They'll go home for Friday afternoon feeling relaxed on the weekend. But if they come back on Monday morning with an email full of emails and a manager screaming down their throat that they need a proposal written in half an hour, your massage isn't going to help that. And there needs to be that, I suppose, that underlying message throughout all of these things, that wellbeing perks have their place, but the message about good work, good management, good data in your organisations trumps all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't like using the word Trump, because obviously that brings up loads of other connotations.
Yeah, let's not go down
that road.
So look, I'm gonna play devil's advocate, even though for those who have listened to me before know that I basically think the same as you. but for the purpose of making this more interesting, let me ask you about what does evidence actually mean? What do you mean by evidence?
Well, I suppose there's two things here when you talk about it. You've got the academic evidence. You've got, when people do the systematic reviews about what works in organisations, and they trawl through various publications, which obviously have their own nuances and they have their own biases and they have their own flaws to it as well. But I suppose if you want to know what happens what to make things right, you have to look at what's been done and what's worked and what hasn't worked and why it hasn't worked. So you've got the academic evidence, the hardcore stuff, and then I suppose you've got actually what's happening in organisations. So that you've got the internal evidence. What is your organisational data saying? What are your processes saying? And then use that as evidence to see what's working. So it's a two-pronged approach, really. because you've got the academic evidence to say, well, this is what works, but it'll only work if it's implemented properly.
Yeah.
So you need the evidence from organisations, from employers to say, well, this is how it worked, this is what didn't work. Maybe if we nuanced it this way or implemented it that way, it could work. So both bits of evidence are important.
Yeah.
That's why I suppose I like working at IES, because we try to bridge that. Let's look at what the academic evidence saying versus what's actually happening in organisations, and then try to build recommendations for organisations based on that two-pronged approach evidence to try and make it practicable to organisations. Because and this is the thing, and this is why I like coming to these conferences, because that academic stuff is hard. It's hard to reach if you don't come from that background. We need to have people like the people that present here, organisations who speak to themselves, research organisations like IES, like the CIPD, to translate that into real easy ways for organisations to understand what is being said. Because it's a difficult thing. Well-being is tough.
Yeah. So, do you think there's a risk, again, I'm playing devil's advocate,
It's okay.
that the world of well-being holds itself, and HR more generally perhaps, holds itself to too high a standard, and there are plenty of things happening in organisations that aren't based on systematic reviews, aren't based on this, that or the other, but just happen because but well-being is obsessed with it being itself being evidence-based, which then pokes holes in what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I do think there does have to be.
I'm struggling even to ask these questions.
Come on, get it out, Matt. Get it out. I don't know whether it holds itself to account enough sometimes.
Really?
HR.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm not being down on the profession, because it is also a very difficult profession to have. You read these articles to say like HR managers and line managers are two of the most stressful positions to have in an organisation, because people have them on pedestals.
Yeah.
But people have them on pedestals because they want to see change happen. And how do we see change happen? Well, we have to look out there to see what is going on to make that change. And I suppose you have to hold yourself to account a little bit, because you're in charge of the people. And in an organisation, it's the people that make things happen. So if we don't hold them to account, then who does have accountability for things? And you can say, well, everybody has accountability for well-being, which is true. But at the same time, HR are your human resources. They're there to look after people. They're there to make things tick and to work and to help things flow nicely in organisations. So it's a difficult one. Yeah. It is, and I've never purported to say that I have the answers. I don't. Yeah. I'm a thinker. I like to propose things to people. No.
So look, part of the reason I'm asking some of these questions, I did a really interesting conversation with Rob Breener a few months ago at another event, and we were talking about a similar sort of thing, right? He's Mr. Evidence-Based Practice and all the rest of it, and I was terrified interviewing him.
Great hair.
He does have good hair, yeah.
Sorry, Rob.
So terrified interviewing him because, he's the oracle on everything evidence-based.
Yeah.
And I said to him at the time, that I get kind of triggered by the posts that he puts out, because they challenge what you're trying to do, because everything you're trying to do from a well-being perspective is like, it's with positive intent.
Yeah.
And that's not what he's having a pop at. But when you read those, it's very difficult. There's no evidence for this, that this well-being approach doesn't work, that doesn't work. It's very difficult not to get a little bit defensive and be like, oh bloody hell, well, what does work?
Yeah, well this is why
seemingly nothing works. So
I have a little triangle, little triangle of what works, and people will completely disagree, and you're free to disagree with it. But my little triangle is 3 corners, as a triangle has. Stupid thing to say.
A 4-cornered triangle.
Yeah. 4-cornered. So for me, it's about. So if we're looking at in organisations, I'm stuffing academia out of it at the moment. If we're looking practically in organisations about what works, I think people say, oh, this works in my organisation and that works in my organisation. So there's no one size fits all for every organisation. And I think that's the first key point. Look at what your data is saying in your organisation. Listen to what your people are saying in your organisation, because otherwise you could put anything in and it won't work, because it might not be what your people need. So understanding your own data, and that's where data analytics is really important, HR data. Organisations probably don't collect enough of it. People probably think we collect too much of it, but actually we don't. We look at sickness absence, but do people report their sickness absence properly? Are we actually doing like stress management standards? Do we do the risk assessments? Do we do the data that we're supposed to be collecting under the Health and Safety at Work Act? No. I was at a conference in December and I said, these are people who are wellbeing experts and in charge of wellbeing in their organisation. And I said, so who knows that under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 that it's every year you could do a psychosocial assessment of your staff. One person put their hand up, and that was Professor Max Henderson, who knows his stuff. So I said, Max, I'm not including you in this. And this was a room of 250 wellbeing experts. Yeah. So we don't collect the right data. We don't collect enough data. So one corner of my triangle is data. We need to have the data and we need to analyse it properly. The next part is what does work is good work. And that word is being thrown around loads at the moment with the Get Britain Working and the Charlie Mayfield review. And yes, there are all sorts of different definitions of good work. But, if we look at the fundamentals of what good work is, we want people to feel valued at work. We want them to have the right demands and resources. We want people to have the level of flexibility that makes sure that they can work well. We need to be good supported. We need to make sure that they have good feedback mechanisms, valued. So the good work. So that's point number 2. And then point number 3 is I suppose what people know that I talk about most is good management. Because you can have good data and you can have good work, but actually if your management sucks and if you don't have a good relationship with your manager where you can't feel like you're open, you're not being performance managed properly, you're not having good feedback loops, you're not being communicated, you're not being cared for, you feel like you're on your own, well, that won't work for you either. And so people might agree, might disagree, but the good data, good work, good management, I think are the key fundamentals for what makes a good workplace. And potentially you can argue that in singularity all those things are evidence-based, but altogether I think they make quite a cohesive argument.
How can I argue with that?
There you go.
How can I argue with that? I'm going to have one more question about it before I do ask about the leadership. So let me use a different example. So let's think of an IT system. So an IT system is implemented across an organisation for many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds. It's not evidence-based. They don't collect any data as to the usefulness of that IT system. No one questions it. They just do it. Just get on with it. They use that IT system. And do you know what? Everybody else uses that same IT system. And then you get these monoliths, these software companies who are selling these. And they are not coming to events like this talking about whether what they're doing is evidence-based. They're talking about how do I sell the IT system to the next person. Maybe we should do that.
Maybe we should. But I suppose people will come back to say, well, what we do is a bit more human. And it has a bit more of a human impact.
We should hold ourselves to a
And if we get that, like if an IT system goes wrong, it's a bit tragic. Look at Marks and Spencer's and the Curb, but there are all these cyber attacks. But it can be fixed quite easily. If your health and well-being goes wrong or gets screwed, if you then leave the workforce because of that, it's harder for you to get back in. So which is why I think the evidence is more important in these types of things, because if we don't get it right, then the negative effects it can have on an individual and the organisation and the ramifications are a lot bigger. It becomes personal and it becomes about somebody's individual health and their ability to look after themselves and to do their job.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to leave evidence now, because like I say, that is all so weird for me, because I don't actually, I'm on your side, but I wanted to have that conversation, and I rarely get to have that conversation. With some of that challenge. So I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So let me ask you about the managers then. What was his name? Hopper from A Bug's Life. Have you seen A Bug's Life?
Oh, I haven't.
So there's a Disney film called A Bug's Life. Are you aware of it?
Yes.
There's a bad guy in it called Hopper, and he's got a quote that always stuck with me. He says, the first rule of leadership is it's all your fault, right? Okay. So is it all leaders' fault?
Is it all the leader's fault? Now, this is where I would argue no, and I've had a lot of flack for what I'm saying. I stood up in the conference and I said, I actually feel really sorry for line managers.
Absolutely.
And there was an intake of breath, like, oh. And I said, let me tell you for why. Let me give you for why. And I said, the first point is, a lot of them don't want to be a manager. So I love the CMI report about 82% of managers are accidental managers because they've been promoted into that because they're good at their technical job. Doesn't mean they're a good people manager, but they've been forced into that position. So I feel sorry for them because a lot of them don't want to be it.
Yeah.
The second is, if you look at what they're asked to do, the list is exhaustive.
Absolutely.
It's exhaustive. We're asking them to be people managers, to be well-being managers, to be performance managers, to be sickness absence managers, to be critical friends, to be careers counsellors, coaches, and that's only half of it, you know. And then to do their job.
And then to actually
do their job. And then thirdly, is their job is growing. And there has been, and people argue against me when I say this, but the devolvement of HR responsibility onto line managers has been huge. And they're not trained to do it. And so
but you don't have the HR resources available within the organisation.
No.
Well, no, but
you do have, and some do, some don't.
And is there a risk that the line managers pass it on too quickly?
Yeah.
I'm managing you, and you come to me and I say, "How was your day?" And you go, "Not too well," and I'm like, "Right, HR."
Yeah, but a lot of people don't do that, and that's what I feel. That's what I feel. That like the poor line manager then takes it on their shoulders, and they're not prepared for that, and they're not trained for that, and they might not have the competencies to do that. I remember interviewing a line manager, and he said to me, "This is for piece of work about the management of mental health at work," and he said to me, I don't just go home with my worries, I go home with the worries of the 8 people that I manage. And I can't give feedback in an interview because it's supposed to be apolitical, and I just was sat there going, but that means you're a good manager, and you're doing yourself injustice by thinking that you're not doing a good job. No, you're being failed yourself. Because you think that you have to carry all that burdened responsibility on your shoulder. And so I feel sorry for the manager, which is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I come to conferences like this and everybody's saying, oh, managers should be doing this, managers should be doing Y, and managers are the linchpin of an organisation, they're the heartbeat. And I'm sitting there going, no, they're the squeezed. They're the squeezed middle. They've got all this responsibility and nowhere to go and no training and potentially not even the time to do the job justice. And so if they're so important for employee well-being, for organisational productivity, for engagement, why aren't we doing the role better? And why aren't we thinking about how we choose our managers, how we develop our managers, how we protect our managers, instead of saying to them all the time, you're doing it wrong?
Yeah. So what's the answer then? Developing them better and...
Well, everybody says let's throw training at them, but I don't think that's right. In a sense, it can be right, but it's got to be the right type of training.
Yeah.
For me, I often talk about the AMO model, so the ability, motivation, and the opportunities. So are we picking people with the right ability? And we talk about skills and skill development and skills pipelines and talent pipelines. Where's our talent management pipeline? Where's our leadership management pipeline? We just don't develop it because we think we can just promote people into leadership positions, and that's not right. So we need to actually start looking at our workforce and start thinking, well, who's got the ability and the capability to be a manager? Because it's not for everyone, and it's also okay for somebody to say, I don't want to be a manager. So are you an advocate of separate job ways of progressing? Because the risk is if you say no, I don't want to be a manager, well, that's the end of your career. I know, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, because you can still do loads technically, and actually people shouldn't. If people don't want to be a manager, haven't got the ability, they shouldn't, because actually that could be so negative for your organisation. That phrase, join an organisation, leave a manager, still rings true. And people should have that in their head when they're thinking about this pipeline. So I am an advocate for the two-way progression route, because not everybody can be, or not everybody should be a manager. So you've got the ability section, then you've got, even if somebody's got the ability to do it, if they've not got the motivation to do it, even if they've got the ability to do it, they just won't do it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just as dangerous.
Yeah.
So you want somebody who actually has the motivation to want to manage. And that's really important, because it's a skill.
Yeah.
And it's and the thing is, that's the emotional intelligence, the empathy part of the management. Like Peter Cheese was talking this morning about AI and can you manage by AI? And I'm like, but with every introduction of technology, you also have to have that human-centric approach. I don't think AI management by AI is going to work, because you need that human person, you need that emotional intelligence, that empathy, that person that you can go for a walk with or a cup of tea with, the person who can say to you, are you okay, and can take it if you say, no, I'm having a really crap day. So somebody might have the ability, but if they don't have the motivation, it's not going to work. And then the opportunities is what we were talking about, is the organisational support and the resources that managers need to work. So managers can't work in silo. They need the support themselves. And I've quoted it at another question that I asked today. They was talking about inclusive wellbeing practices and saying, well, managers have to do this, one, and this. And the recent report by Gallup that says that actually managers are the most stressed point in an organisation, and their engagement is well down because they have to do everything else that everybody isn't doing. So managers need to have the support and the opportunities and the organisational resources to do it well. If you're managing 10, 12 people, then you're not going to be managing them well.
Yeah.
You're not. You can probably manage somebody to say you're doing a good job, but are you going to be doing the how are you doing question?
Yeah.
How's a touch point?
I'll give you another one. Even before that, I love that model that you talked about in terms of behaviour change, but even before that, awareness. That's even part of the job. Do you know what? I ran a leadership kind of management training session a couple of months ago, and worked with this group, great group and all the rest of it. And we were having a conversation right at the end of the full day, and one of them came up to me and said, do you know, the best part of this training was I've realised that this is part of my job.
Yeah.
And they just they were being genuine. They were like, I'd not put two and two together that this is part of my job. I'd seen this as an unwanted side effect of being a manager.
Yeah.
Really, my job is to get shit done.
Yeah.
And then on the side, I've got all these kind of people, soft and fluffy things that I kind of know about, but I don't really know about. And that comes back to things like, when you're recruiting into those positions, realistic job previews. What does this actually mean?
Exactly.
But people don't. No. They're just, what does it mean? It means I get $5,000 more salary.
Yeah.
Right, great, ace. And then they'll say, well, you got to manage a team of 6. Yeah, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you actually know the realities of that? Yeah.
Do you have the ability to communicate to your team what you need from them?
Yeah.
And to be there and to give that critical feedback. And being managed also really difficult. One of the best things I got from Steve was he used to say that a manager is in a really difficult position because they have to be an advocate and they have to be an apologist. So they're there because they have to advocate for organisational policies and practices. That's part of their job, is to be that translator. To be that translator of policy to practice on the ground floor. But then they're there going, I really want to be able to do this for you, but I'm really sorry because I can't because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And that's you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. And it takes a really good, competent line manager, and one that's competent of their own ability and their strength to do that. Now, see, people say to me, would I want to be a line manager? And I said, I kind of would, but then I kind of wouldn't as well, because the level of responsibility is immense, and God bless all the line managers. Well, if you're good ones, God bless you. You know what I mean? But this is why we wrote the book, because I was fed up of organisations and people saying that line managers are the villains. They're not the villains. They're working in a world that's changing. They're working in a world now where things like they're having to manage hybrid teams, they're having to manage multi-generational organisations, they're having to manage people who are sicker than ever. And, that's tough. That's a tough thing to have.
Yeah.
And so what we need to have is the understanding that line management's important, an organisation needs to know that it's important, and they need to treat it just as important as anything else that they see as important. You know, we have all these HR developments and the practices for, professional development for HR. Where's that for management? You have it for management, but where's that for line management? And I'm not saying that potentially we need to go down the professional route, but it needs the role needs to be given that same level of elevation. It needs to be given that same level as importance.
Yeah.
Because I do feel sorry for them, and it's a difficult role, and we need to start planning for future line managers now. Really, we need to start looking at who we've got in our organisation and thinking about it. Organisations, have their training and their practices for like business acumen and advertising and finance and but where is that for management? Where are those schemes to help a poor manager? And this is what I'm really concerned about with the Get Britain Working and the Keep Britain Working stuff that's going on at the moment. And I understand why we're doing it. We haven't got the people back like other European countries post-COVID, and there are a lot of people who have the ability to work but might not have the workplaces to do it. But we're going to be asking a lot of our managers to look after these people with health conditions coming back to work.
Yeah.
And we're not getting it right now.
Yeah.
And so if we get these 1.8 million people back into the workforce with with potentially really difficult long-term health conditions or health conditions that will need a lot more supervision, we just don't have the management capability to do it at the moment. And that's a massive concern of mine.
Yeah.
And I really want it to work. Don't get me wrong, I really want it to work. But I think we're missing a big picture. And I was saying this to Peter Cheese, this isn't new. This isn't new. We know this. We've had this from the Good Work Review by Taylor, the Farmer and Stevenson report, even like the Making the Healthier Work Tomorrow, the 2008 report by Dame Carol Black. She said in that report that line managers were key for health and well-being, and that was 2008. And we're still in 2025, 17 years on, and we're still having the same fundamental conversations. What is going to be the thing that really moves that dial to show this is important? I don't know what it is, because we haven't hit it yet.
No.
We clearly haven't got to that stage where this is really now important to get right. But I don't know what it is, and I don't know what government needs, I don't know what organisation needs, I don't know what policies need to make this change, because we're having the same conversations. We're having that, I've worked in this world for like 10, 15 years now, and I'm still having the same conversation. And I don't know what and I really don't know what it is that's going to move that dial forward, because it needs to be moved. But who knows? What's your answer, Matt?
Well, I don't know. Look, I'd tell you where I'm at with some of that is that we run a community for wellbeing leaders. So specifically for people who are responsible for wellbeing within their organisations, who have the challenge of developing the line managers with some of these skills, and we are on 650 members. Why are we not 6,000 members? Why are we not 60,000 members?
People don't see it's important.
Because people don't have the time, they're all too busy, We also run a course, which is an accelerator course, this isn't a sales pitch, by the way, but it's
sounding good though.
Well, no, but it's about helping them build the skills to manage psychosocial risk in the workplace, and all these sorts of things that I think are really important, and the evidence shows are really important. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, maybe I shouldn't say this on camera, but it's hard to sell places to that accelerator course. I don't know why, because they well-being managers don't feel like they should invest in themselves.
Some of this does go down to enforcement.
Right. So I should mandate it.
Well, no.
Make it the law. You must be working well.
But is it being enforced? Now, you've got the really interesting, I don't know if you heard, you probably have heard about it, the really interesting case about Birmingham University.
Okay, yes.
At the moment, because HSE have gone in there because they aren't doing enough preventative measures.
Yep.
Now, I think that's fascinating, and maybe this will be the dial. Maybe this will be what we need.
Yeah.
Because their unions have cried out to say, we aren't coping. The staff aren't coping. And they say, well, we've got an EAP. Right, I'm not bashing EAPs, but it's all very reactive. Where is the prevention? Where is the enforcement? Where are the people? And it's difficult. And I know well-being is, I know people call it the fluffy thing because, you know, it's not as, you know, somebody's going up a ladder and they might fall. So you don't have those same liabilities, I suppose. And enforcing well-being is difficult. But it needs to be enforced. It needs to be done.
But we've had false dawns before, Zofia.
I know.
Like I was literally, this is shows how sad I am. I was waiting with bated breath for the release of ISO 45003, and some weird thing in my head thought that in, was it August 2022, that suddenly everyone would be like ringing around like, oh, we need to do this ISO standard. If you went out there now and you asked, 20 employers, do they know what ISO 45003? I bet half of them don't even know what it is. Well, no, but that's just an example. That was something that I thought, this will be it, right? This will be it. This ISO standard, that'll change it, and it didn't. And then other things come in, and then you've got COVID, which did change things. It shifted things on a societal level, good and bad. And they've just gone back.
Well, it shifted organisations to the sparkly things.
Right.
It shifted organisations to think about, what can we bring in? And the fruit baskets, the head massages. Where is the good work evangelism that we need to go out there? I had high hopes for COVID, making
There's the clip. There's the clip for the socials.
Let's bring COVID back. No. But I suppose COVID led to lots of change all at once, and so HR managers were floundering a little bit with what to do. And I get that because, who in their risk assessment for 2020 had a worldwide pandemic, right? Nobody did. And so they were floundering. They had to do what they thought was right in the moment. I suppose now looking back at it, we have a better understanding of looking at, well, what could have worked, what could have been done better, blah, blah, blah. And organisations should use that as a learning point now going forward. But at the same time, like you said, it's brought in the understanding of well-being, that we have to look after our staff. Yes, we do have to look after our staff, but it's brought in the fact, okay, then we can just provide EAPs, we can send somebody to occupational health, but that's all still reactive. It hasn't really got people on there. Okay, so how do we design work better? How do we manage people better? How do we do job crafting? And that's the frustrating thing, and that's the frustrating.
But what does it, Zofia? Because I'll tell you another false dawn was the paper out of the Oxford Wellbeing Centre, the
Fleming paper.
No, I'm talking about, that was the one that said that wellbeing interventions don't work. I'm talking about
individual
I'm
wellbeing
talking about the Indeed data that proved the business case. Pretty irrefutably proves the business case for wellbeing, and causal as well as longitudinal data. So if there's a financial imperative to look at this stuff the organisations still don't care.
Well, but which is weird, right? Isn't it? Which is weird.
They don't care about the finance. They've got no moral obligation.
Well, I do think they do. I think they do care about the finance.
Yes.
But that's why they bring in the easy to do things to change, because they just don't want to touch the hard thing. They don't want to touch the culture because it's too hard for them to touch.
Yeah.
But they don't realise that in the long term, that is what's going to be best for them, because we don't have a return on investment for that. We don't. We have a return on investment for other things. But touching culture and touching job design, it's harder to quantify. It's difficult, and it also helps.
That goes back to what I said about the IT system earlier.
Doesn't
in the sense that bloody do it anyway.
But this is the thing. But this is
you're doing the IT system.
And it all comes back down to productivity and how we measure productivity, and are we doing it hours per worked or quality of work done, blah blah blah. And that's a lot of, and I think a lot of this goes to it essentially is a lot of mindset change. Which is hard. And I can understand why organisations want it, because they want the easy answer. They don't want to be told, look, go back to point zero and design your jobs differently. Think about job crafting. Think about, all that difficult stuff that we don't want to touch.
90% of your line managers shouldn't be line managers.
Yeah, well, totally.
What do we do?
Totally. That's what Kerry Cooper once said. He was just like, let's cull them. And I'm like, that's fine, Kerry. Yeah, let's cull them. But before we cull some of them, can we develop some others? Or at least highlight what the good ones are doing to show what they're doing well.
Absolutely. Look, we're well over time now, but no, I'm loving the conversation. That's why I've run it over. I was desperate to ask you one final question.
Yeah, do it.
AI, because you mentioned it earlier on, psychosocial risk or control measure?
Oh God, both.
In 30 seconds.
Honestly, I think AI could be really good, but it has to be done well. I'm not in for AI monitoring. No. I think it has to be done with transparency, with clarity about why it's being brought in, with transparency about if it's collecting data, what data is going to be used, but with a human-centric approach, with the understanding that actually humans are still what is going to make an organisation go. So it's not going to take your job. We're not monitoring X, Y, and Z. We're not monitoring your productivity, but it could help.
I posted good answer. I posted about a paper that I
saying it's a good answer.
No, good answer. Yeah. I posted about a paper coming out of China, the academic institute in China, a couple of weeks ago, where they were lauding the fact that they were now able to put cameras up in the corners of the room and measure your emotions based on your facial recognition.
And that's awful. What's the point?
They were correlating that with,
I see. This is where I'm
and also, you'll have people walking around like smiles on their face, like I'm fine.
This is going to take even more every time. But this is what I'm really worried about, because is that going to take away the conversation, the "How are you doing" conversation? Like somebody said this morning that they had this, some organisations were measuring using AI somebody's contribution to a meeting, and if they weren't seeing to contribute, then they won't be invited to the next meeting. Well, what does that mean about human connection? What if somebody was just having a bit of a bad day and didn't feel like they were able to speak in that meeting? Or somebody was overruling the meeting and not letting anybody else contribute? Does that mean that they're not going to be included next time? That's when AI can be really dangerous, I think. Because it takes the human out of work.
Yeah. Or what if you were just there to add, to back up the person next to you? You know, the more junior member of staff who you're there as like support for them. And the whole point is that you're not saying as much.
Exactly.
Actively, consciously not saying as much.
So these types of things in AI, I think, are really dangerous, because it takes away that person. It does take away that everybody's saying, oh, now we have these well-being apps that somebody could tell me whether they're happy or not. No, ask somebody.
Yeah.
Ask somebody.
But the managers have got too much to do anyway. No, anyway.
No, stop doing that.
They got too much to do. Anyway, we've got too much to do.
We have.
Look,
taken
it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We definitely need an episode 2. We 100%
Let's do it. Let's do it in the diary.
Get into some more of this if you're up for it at some point. But where are we going to sign off? Tell people where they can find you. What's the book called? How to Be the Line Manager You Never Had. Catchy. I love it. Yeah. I love it. So it's available on all good bookstores. And honestly, on a more personal note, so I mentioned Steve before. This book was commissioned while Steve was still well, and then he got poorly. And Kerry Cooper and I then decided to dedicate the book to him. He once told me that if I couldn't come to him with a problem, both work or non-work related, then he would have failed me as a manager. He never failed me as a manager. I could always go to him, and that's the type of person that we want as a manager. Now, it's weird that I wrote that book, How to Be the Line Manager You Never Had, because I think I had the line manager that everybody would want. So my 2 notes are, line manager really matters, and organisations need to elevate that position as to any other position that they think, but also to ease the squeeze on the manager. Line manager well-being also really matters, and if they're not being looked after, then they can't look after their people that they manage. Lovely. And if people want to hear more from you, what, LinkedIn? LinkedIn, Blue Sky. X. Blue Sky? You're on Blue Sky? Blue Sky. Are you on X as well? Well, I'm coming off that a little bit now. I can't deal with X. I can't deal with it. But yeah, probably LinkedIn is the main one for me now. But yeah, hit me up. Nice one. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the pod.
You're welcome. It's very warm in this pod, isn't it?
And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. This episode is brought to you by WellHub, the corporate wellness platform transforming how companies care for their teams with a single subscription. Get an exclusive free trial using the link in the description below.